in the world. We still have our special relationship with the United States, despite Mr. Obama having removed the bust of Churchill from the White House. We still have our special relationship with the Commonwealth of Nations, including one nation, Mozambique, that never was part of the British Empire, that applied to join because it liked the friendliness and common sense of purpose that the Commonwealth has. And so all of these links that we already have, and of course we also have many friendly links with Europe. One thing you should not ever think, David, is that those of us who are tired of the European Union are anti-European. We are pro-European. I studied the ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome, and I'm a huge admirer of the contribution that Europe has made to our civilization in music, in art, in architecture, in literature, in science, in so many different fields. Europe has been the cradle of today's civilization.
Yes.
So why then would I wish to sever myself from it? The answer is I don't. But the European Union is not only anti-democratic, it is anti-European. It stands against the continent that gave the world not only the concept, but also the name of democracy. It stands against the civilization, the Christian civilization, that has been such a gentle force throughout the world, such a force for good on balance. Not that us Christians are perfect by any means, but at least we're trying to be. And this is all rejected by the European Union. So your raising of the biblical quotation there is a very important one, because although most of our church leaders who are left-wing are therefore in favor of the European Union, some of them are beginning to wake up to the fact that the biggest threat to religion here in Britain is the European Union itself. This is a growing problem now. For instance, no Catholic ends up as a commissar, or very few of them do, because they're subjected to a grilling, a public grilling by the other commissars. And one of the questions they tend to get asked is, what is your view about homosexuality? And of course, if you're Catholic, you say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but the church is against it. I'm not against any individual homosexual, but what they do is something that we think is wrong. And it's wrong because it's medically dangerous. And if you say that, you can't become a commissar. So they're already getting into the moral sphere as well as the economic sphere and the political sphere and the democratic sphere, and taking over and allowing only one point of view, which is generally a very left-wing and very anti-religious point of view, to prevail.
And it's not just in appointing people into office, as Boris Johnson pointed out. He went through, it was about a month ago, and I covered it and talked about the parallels between the reasons that he said would be good for Britain to get out of the European Union. And I said, hey, these are all great reasons for Texas to get out of the United States, to secede from the United States. We ought to have a Texit. And actually, there was an article that came out a couple of days ago from The Guardian. I guess they saw that, or they were talking to some Texas independence people and called it Texit. But one of the things that he said was, would be able to get out from under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, which is increasingly arbitrating in questions over which we never thought it would have any power, like the rights of a child, getting into the family. And so they've got a court that is intruding itself into the details of individual life. It's not just excluding people because of their religious beliefs, but it's that kind of intolerance. And, you mentioned Winston Churchill a couple of times, his bust. We talked about the issue of whether or not David Cameron is acting like Neville Chamberlain. When Winston Churchill talked in the history of the English-speaking people about the American Brexit, our revolution, what he said was it was a liberating force for Britain. He said what it did was it enabled them to strengthen parliamentary democracy. And I think the people you're talking about, there's no animosity, there's no xenophobia about the people of Europe. You don't want to isolate yourself from them. But it is something that the European groups themselves want, self-government, just like you want it in Britain. And so it would be a liberating thing for all of the people of Europe. That is why the powers that be, the political globalist powers, why all of the industrialists and people like George Soros, all the central bankers are working so hard to defeat this referendum tomorrow. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Lord Monkton, and we're going to have more Trump coverage coming up in the... Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Lord Monkton. We're talking about the upcoming election tomorrow, Brexit. Will Britain leave the European Union? Will they vote for freedom for self-government, or will they be subsumed into this expanding Borg? Now, just before we went to break, we mentioned Texit, and Lord Monkton, about a month ago, Boris Johnson, former mayor of London, came out and gave 8 reasons why Britain would be better off outside the European Union. And when he did that, I played each one of the points, and I said, you know, what would happen if if Texas left the United States, if we seceded successfully? And like the first point, he says, well, there's 350 million pounds per week that are going to the European Union net that we're losing. And I looked at our numbers, and I came up with $1.5 billion per week going to the federal government net from Texans. And so we would have that money to spend. So there are all these different parallels. We go step by step and say, hey, why can't we govern ourselves? Texas is 10 times larger than all 13 colonies were combined at the time they did their Brexit. So clearly we have a much more diversified economy. We have our own energy sources, just as Britain does. We could go it alone as well. Oh, we don't have...
in the Daily Caller a month ago. And I was recommending that Texas should indeed secede. I believe it has a right under its own constitution when it joined the Union to reserve the chance to secede if it ever wished to do so. And I believe it's the only state that has this special privilege. However, under the post-colonial disposition in international law, where the right of self-determination of peoples is paramount, if the people of Texas, which is quite large enough and economically prosperous enough to be viable as an independent state, chose to become independent, whether or not the United States Constitution or the Texas Constitution allows it, if the people of Texas want it, then they should have it. And I know the Republican leadership in Texas rather shabbily managed to
We're getting a little bit of problem there with the reception on our Skype. It's starting to drop out. Let's say, yeah, are we back now?
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yes, we lost you there for a moment on Skype. Go ahead. We're back.
Okay, I'll just carry on. I was saying that Texit makes a lot of sense. You have the right to secede, even if the United States says you haven't, and even if the Texas Constitution says you haven't.
That's
if
right.
the people wish it, under the post-colonial disposition in international law, you are entitled to become independent whenever you wish to do so.
Well, Boris Johnson is talking about Independence Day. That's what our Declaration of Independence says. I mean, there certainly wasn't any legal authority for them to do it from the British Crown. There wasn't any opportunity from the king to say, well, you can just leave whenever you want to. They took that right. They declared that right because they said, as human beings, we have these natural rights that we possess to secure our liberties. That's the reason that we create governments. That's the fundamental basis for our government. So I'm in favor of anybody having self-government at any level.
And that is how international law now works, particularly in the post-colonial era. And I'm going to make you an offer here, David. I'm going to say this. On behalf of Her Majesty and the British government, if Texas would like to leave the United States and rejoin the Crown, then the only tax you will pay is £0.5 crown a pound on tea. And the rest you won't have to pay. Now, you compare that with what your federal government charges, and you see that you'll be better off under the Crown than you would under the United States.
Well, we'd have that taxation with some representation. See, the problem we have now, Lord Monkton, is we have regulation without representation, just as you do in the EU, except ours is coming from the federal bureaucracy. They enact an even larger bureaucratic burden on us than the European Union does on Britain. Stay with us. Right after the top of the hour, we're going to be back with Lord Monkton for another 5 minutes. Thank you for sticking around for another 5 minutes. Then after that, Alex Jones is going to be joining us with more comments about Donald Trump's speech today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Lord Monkton. We've been talking about the vote coming up tomorrow as to whether or not Britain will leave the European Union. But now I want to switch gears, and I want to talk to Lord Monkton about another vote that's coming up tomorrow, one that's in California. This is a vote as to whether or not California will leave its senses. Well, I should say further leave their senses, because they've done it in so many different ways. This is something, of course, we've talked about many times, and Lord Monkton, usually when he comes on, he's talking about climate change. Again, you can find him at scienceandpublicpolicy.org, scienceandpublicpolicy.org, and What's Up With That. That's WATTS, whatsupwiththat.com. You can find Lord Monkton's writings there. Now, we've seen Bill Nye come out and say that there needs to be RICO prosecution against people who deny man-made global warming. tomorrow we have a vote scheduled in California. The Senate is going to vote on a first-of-its-kind legislation scheduled for floor action tomorrow. The measure would allow state and local prosecutors to pursue claims against climate change skepticism as a violation of the state's unfair competition law, as well as extend the 4-year statute of limitations for such claims retroactively to 2021, January the 1st, 2021. The bill, according to the Senate Rules Committee analysis, it says this bill explicitly authorizes district attorneys and the California Attorney General to pursue these claims, alleging that a business or organization has directly or indirectly engaged in unfair competition just because you are engaging in scientific discussion. That is absolutely amazing, Lord Monkton. Your comments?
Well, that is communism.
Yes.
And I'm not surprised that California, of all places, should be the first state to try this on. It's also directly contrary, as I understand it, to the First Amendment to your Constitution, which guarantees the right of free speech.
Yes.
So I don't think this bill, even if it were passed as a sort of gesture to please the communist left, which now infests most of California, I don't think even the Obama-tainted Supreme Court could possibly allow such a bill to stand. It would be struck down the first time a case was brought under it. So I don't think that's a realistic problem, really. The other thing is, of course, that the one thing that the communist left will not do is take any climate skeptic to court. Because, of course, in a court, whether they like it or not, both sides have to be fairly heard in the way that they're not fairly heard in the mainstream or Marxstream media. The fact is that in a court, both sides are fairly heard. And when we took Al Gore's movie to court in the High Court in London, the first firm of solicitors we tried to engage to do this refused to take the case on the grounds that we had absolutely no chance of winning. And so I was consulted by the people who wanted to bring the case, and I said, well, just find another firm of solicitors and I will give them scientific testimony which will demonstrate that the film is not scientific, it's anti-scientific, it's political, it's left-wing political at that. And under an Act of Parliament, the Education Act 1988, which I helped to draft when I worked at 10 Downing Street with Margaret Thatcher, it's illegal to take sides in politics in schools. You can by all means have political discussions, but you mustn't take sides. And I said that because all these errors in Al Gore's movie pointed in one direction towards undue and anti-scientific alarm, the film shouldn't be shown unless corrective guidance were circulated. We won that case. And exactly the same what happened against and they took that case in California. I'm sorry, it's breaking up again.
Yes, we broke up a little bit.
Then if they tried to take, if they tried to take that case, even to the left-wing judges in California, once they hear the arguments on both sides, they will realize that it is, in fact, the communist left and the climate change extremists who are wrong, and the skeptics who are correct.
The truth will out. Thank you so much, Lord Monkton, and I hope that you vote for your Independence Day tomorrow. We'll all be watching. All the eyes of the world will be on Britain tomorrow. We'll be right back.